I know this interview is going to change many people's lives. I'm always fascinated when I see people who are really good at their craft, and especially when it comes to telling stories. I always want to know the story behind the storyteller.
I was recently on Keith Nestor's incredible podcast. I said, Keith, ask me anything. And he did. He asked me questions that nobody has ever asked me before. I want you to go see that full interview because he did an incredible job. But I'm going to share with you 3 questions that I think you're going to find very interesting. Let's take a listen.
I want to talk a little bit about your family for a second. Sure. Tell us about your family and, where did you meet your wife?
Oh, I love my wife. So I met my wife while I was at the University of St. Thomas. I went through this phase where I was looking for a wife.
Okay.
I had read this great book called The ABCs of Choosing a Good Spouse. I believe it was by a guy named Steve Wood. And he made a list, and we told people, make a list of non-negotiables that you find are important in a spouse.
That's a great list.
And then make a list of things that you can sacrifice on. And when you go on quote unquote dates, get to these things first. A lot of times in relationships, people will wait to talk about the important topics, and they will get physically intimate for whatever reason, and they will get intimate physically before they're intimate emotionally. And is this person even good for me? And that really clouds your judgment when you're in a relationship. So I was in this season of life where I would ask beautiful young women, would you like to get coffee? And I would just run through it would be a very delightful conversation. At least I thought it was delightful. It's one-sided.
And then you got the list out.
Yeah. And I would ask questions about marriage. I would ask questions about, what do you want people to say about you when you die? Are you open to life? Are you open to the sexual teachings of the Catholic Church? How do you feel about artificial contraception? So things that are really non-negotiable, I wanted to get out on the table immediately before we go on like a real date where I'm investing money in you. So I'm only spending $2 on this nice little chat. And so one day I was at the school library, and I was the president of the student activities board. So I was in charge of all of the major activities on campus. And I was really coming around in my Catholic faith that I was trying to make everything wholesome and good. And I had a significant amount of money to spend on giveaways, door prizes, gifts. And so I was in the school library, and I saw this beautiful young woman there. And I said, I know what I'll do. I'll ask her if she had X amount of dollars, what kind of gift cards would she buy? What kind of electronics would she buy? What kind of restaurants would she want to go to? And so I went and I was like, hey, I got a question for you. This is like my way in. It wasn't 100% virtuous, my intentions. I was trying to like hit on her because I'd seen her around and she's beautiful. And so I asked, if you had $400 or $200, what restaurants would you go to? And she said, I don't go to restaurants. And I said, what? Why don't you go to restaurants? She says, I'm a vegetarian. I was like, what? Whoa. And I said, what technology would you buy? Would you buy like an MP3 player? She's like, I don't use electronics. I was like, what? And every question I asked, it was not the norm. It was like, I left that circumstance thinking, who are you? Like, why are you this way? And so I'm very excited about people who think outside the box, especially about college students who don't use electronics, who are I was just like, never encountered a person like this before. So I said, I've got like 1,000 questions to ask you just about your philosophy in general. Can I get your email address? And so she gave me her like, get off my back emails that she gives to like young men at that time who would like try to ask her out on dates. So I sent her this long email with like 100 questions. One of the ones that I remember distinctly was, do you drink alcohol? Are you Catholic? Why do you believe all these things? It's like, literally, I asked several questions. I even wish I could go back on my old college email to see the questions that I asked. And she responded to only 2 of the 50 questions. She drank alcohol. Yes, it's not for religious purposes. So then that sparked like 100 more questions. Why did you only answer 2 of these questions? Did you find the other questions offensive? Why do you drink alcohol, but you don't eat meat? And so finally it ended. I was like, can we just get coffee so I can ask you these questions in person? And I recognized that there was something very different about her. And I did not know if she was Catholic or not. And I like I said, I had the habit of going to the chapel and spending my time there. And I prayed to the Lord. I was like, Lord, is there anything that you want me to ask this girl before we get coffee? And he says, yes. Talk to her about the truth. And if she's willing to follow the truth, whatever that means to her, find out what that means to her. If she's willing to follow the truth, wherever it leads her. And so we got coffee. I asked her about what her favorite books were. I asked her if she was Catholic, because I'd seen her at Mass on one occasion. I saw her at Mass when St. John Paul II was dying. And so I wasn't sure because I hadn't seen her at Mass on Sunday. So I was very confused about her religion. And so she said, I was raised Baptist. I am not a religion right now, but I'm searching. And so I asked her, what are your favorite books? She says, I like St. Francis of Assisi. She's doing all of these readings for her honors program. She's a very smart young woman. She was reading the early church fathers and all these various documents, but not being raised Catholic and having a really good set of Baptist parents. There was just a lot of questions that she had. I asked her about why she wasn't eating meat, why she dressed so simply, because she dresses very simple. You could even almost call it like a habit that she would wear. It's very simple colors, very simple dress. And she said it was because she had done a mission trip in Nicaragua and she saw such poverty that when she came back, that she felt guilty living in such opulence that she wouldn't use hot water and that she would eat very simply and that she wouldn't eat meat because they couldn't afford meat. And so I recognized in her somebody who was willing to be different and change their life for the truth. And so I asked her, I said, if you believed that Catholicism was the one true church founded by Jesus Christ, if you believed that that was true, would you become Catholic? And she says, I guess, yeah, if it's true. And then I asked her about artificial contraception. If you believe that artificial contraception, if it could be proven to you that it's physically poison, that it's spiritually poison, that it's not good whatsoever, if that could be proved to you, would you be willing to follow the truth wherever it leads you? And she says, I guess if you could prove it to me, I guess it would be true. And so we kind of left our coffee date at that. And I had recommended to her, I was like, maybe you should go to a Catholic Mass. I recommend you go to the Catholic Charismatic Center because in my college days, I was really attracted to that because of the fervor and the zeal of the preachers, and also because they treated Jesus in the Eucharist as if he was a real person. And so on Thursday nights, they had these things called healing services. After Mass, the priest would go around and use Jesus and raise him up, and everybody would line up and he would bless people and put the monstrance to their forehead, treating Jesus like he was really Jesus. And one Thursday, I look over and I see her in the line of people coming up to get a blessing. I didn't see her there during the Mass, but she had shown up at some point, and she was one of the very first ones in the line to receive the blessing. And the priest is going over person by person. And afterwards, when it's her turn, immediately after the priest puts the monstrance on her forehead, she falls back. Like it was like in slow motion in my mind. So she was slain in the spirit. And this is a Baptist girl, a good Baptist girl.
They don't do that either, by the way.
They don't do slain in the spirit. And let alone when this priest comes by with whatever that white circle is, Jesus in the Eucharist. And so that for her was a tangible experience of Christ's real presence. And I will say that that initial seed that I got in prayer from Jesus about, are you willing to follow the truth wherever it leads you? She has lived that to the fullest. She embraced Catholicism, not because of me, but because of its intellectual foundations. She's very in tune and in line with a Franciscan spirituality. She's a third order-ish type of deal for the Franciscan Sisters of the Eucharist. She's an incredible, incredible mother. And everything I've ever done, she's given me permission to do it. And this was something that we discussed when we first got married. I was like, one, you're going to have to, and she lives this because she has a very Franciscan spirituality. You're going to have to live a life of simplicity, because I have a very bad habit of spending money on crazy things like video cameras, production equipment. At this point, I had not entered, the thought had not entered my mind about video cameras when we first met. But I just knew that I had this habit of following God wherever he leads me, and that meant I wasn't necessarily going to be the wealthiest person because I was going to get a theology degree. And she's always said yes. She always asked me, are we going to be able to pay the mortgage? Are we going to be able to pay the rent? Yes. And she's like, fine, you can do it. But I always ask her for permission, and she always so far has always given it to me. Yeah, she doesn't like that I talk about her too much, and she's not in any of my videos. She's a very private person. She gives me permission to be out there and in the world. She's like, but just don't let it like impact our family life. Don't, I don't want people bugging me about, oh my gosh, your husband. And people do. People who,
oh yeah,
they're like, oh my gosh, your husband is Gabriel Castillo. And she's like, hi, my name is, I'm not going to say her name. So yeah, she's wonderful.
And you have kids?
I have 4 children. I love them all. And what I would say that my wife did was that in addition to my mom, but my wife gave me an insight into the biological love that the Virgin Mary has for all of her children. So in the spiritual life, things that are natural become supernatural. So just as water is used in baptism, water normally, you need it for life, you need it to clean. So it supernaturalizes, it cleanses you from sin, you need it for eternal life. So too in the natural order concerning the role of mom. What does the mom do biologically? She provides nourishment, consolation. She provides milk that strengthens, that encourages. She cleans, she cooks. She does all these traditional mom things that, yes, dads can do, but traditionally they're for the mother. Mary does all of those things in the supernatural order. And so seeing the way that my wife held my babies when they were first born and the way she looked at them with a love and a focus and an intention that I had never witnessed before in any other human, I would say, wow, the Virgin Mary looks at me like that. Like that's an intense love, that she'd be willing to sacrifice of herself, wake up at night, feed the children of her own flesh, of her own body. So I've gained tremendous insights from watching my wife be an exceptional mother to my children. So.
Do you think that your devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary, like you talked about how that helped you relate to your own mom and without a father. And, you made the statement earlier that you've taken that experience and turned that into motivation for you as a dad.
Right.
Does the same thing apply to your marriage?
Yes. And so one thing that the Virgin Mary does, especially because my spirituality is very much one of Mary is present to me. Mary is with me in this room. Mary is guiding me. She's guarding me. And so I have to listen to her. If I don't listen to Mary, I can't keep coming back to her because she's going to look at me like a mom does when you don't listen to your mom. And so what I find that Mary does in my spousal relationship, she's done 2 things. She keeps a close watch on my conscience, which is very important whenever I wrong my wife or I am short or I am lacking in charity or I'm not doing something around the house and she's picking up more slack. The Virgin Mary makes me feel guilty about it. But the number one thing that Mary has convicted me of, and it's going to convict all of us, I hope, is that she constantly put in my mind the thought that her son died for the church, that her son bled for the church's salvation, for the church's sanctity. And Jesus says, or St. Paul says, I don't remember which one. Oh, I think it was Jesus. Husbands, love your wives like Christ loved the church. So St. Paul.
That's Ephesians, yes.
Yeah, so
Ephesians 5.
Husbands, love your wives like Christ loved the church. Christ died for the church. Christ suffered for the church.
Gave himself up for her.
All of his blood was poured out. For what? For the church's sanctity, for the church's salvation. And so Mary has put it deeply in my soul that it is my responsibility, and it's every husband's responsibility, to live in such a manner that you're sacrificing of yourself so that your wife becomes a saint. And if you look at your wife and say, ain't no way she's a saint because she's this or she's that, that means you have a lot more prayer to do. It is my job as a husband. It is my job as a husband to make sure that my wife goes straight to heaven, that my wife does not have purgatory. That is my vocation, to make her a saint. And if she's lacking in any place, the lacking is because of me. I'm not praying enough. I'm not sacrificing enough. And so what Mary has done for me and continues to do for me is Mary continues to convict me that I have to pray, I have to sacrifice. I don't tell my wife what to do. She has her own spirituality. But if there's anything that I didn't like about her spirituality, I make up for that through suffering, through sacrifice, through penance, through rosaries, through offering masses for her. So every single mass, I offer the consecration of the Most Holy Eucharist for her salvation, for her to go straight to heaven at the hour of her death, for her to become a great saint, for her mother and her father, for her sisters, for their family. And it's every husband's duty, if you're really going to live, husbands, love your wife like Christ loved the church, to offer masses for your spouses, to pray rosaries for your spouses, to sacrifice of yourself so that they can become a saint.
Now, that doesn't mean that they don't have to have personal faith, but that faith comes through that grace. God can work in that grace to bring that person to faith through those sacrifices.
Yep. And the secret is this. So I said that every husband, myself included, is called to sacrifice, to pray fervently every single day so that your spouse becomes a saint. But that process is exactly how you are going to become a saint. My sanctity depends upon me sacrificing of myself for my spouse's sanctity. So the one that you're fighting to save, because you're fighting to save them, that's how you will be saved.
I know you don't watch a ton of Catholic YouTube,
Right. Yes.
but when you think of the landscape of what you hope that that's like,
Right.
what do you wish more Catholic YouTubers were doing, or what do you think that, because a lot of people want to get into that. They're like, oh, I want to start a YouTube channel. What do you think the purpose of Catholic YouTube should be?
Yeah. So I'm called to that scripture verse that St. Peter says, let he who speaks speak with the words that God provides. Let he who works work with the strength that God provides. So my desire, not just for YouTubers, not just for priests and people in ministry, it's that everybody take everything to prayer before saying it and doing it, asking the Lord, what kind of, do you want me to make YouTube videos, Lord? Yeah. What kind of videos do you want me to make? So number one, that. Number two, do your best and try to grow with every single video, and always be open to the Lord making suggestions and changes. I don't watch a lot of Catholic YouTube, but I watch a lot of YouTube. I watch movie reviews. I watch tech reviews. I watch YouTubers like Ryan Trahan. And I ask myself, why do I like watching Ryan Trahan? He's like the Christian version of Mr. Beast. Why do I like watching Ryan Trahan? Because he makes me feel good. Why am I watching movie reviews? Because I want to know if this is something good for my kids. But that I know of, there are no Catholic movie reviewers that are doing things at a high level that would be acceptable in the secular space. So if somebody were to say, I want to make movie reviews and I am Catholic and I will review the movie from a Catholic standpoint, but I'm going to make movie reviews that are just as good as the secular versions, I would watch that. I would watch that. If there was a tech reviewer who was Catholic and he was also a tech reviewer and would put the tech first and tell you the pros and cons with the same quality that those who are doing it purely for money would do, but they do it out of their love for God, I would watch that. But the problem is, in the words of Jesus, the children of this age are far wiser than the children of the light. So I look up to secular people because their love for mammon is not higher than our love for God, and our quality isn't there. And so we have to try to the best of our ability to bring a quality that supersedes even them, because I'm doing this out of love for God. But right now, anybody can be a voice in the church. Anybody can be a voice. If you're willing to put the money in, and the threshold to put the money in is far lower, you can do crazy things with thousands of dollars that you put a loan out, or I'm not recommending people damage their credit, but we didn't start off with money, but we started growing. And that's just my recommendation. If you're feeling called to it, one, it has to be for God. If it is for God, you have to put your whole mind, heart, and soul into it, because that is a reflection of your love for God. And there's a great quote from St. John Bosco and from Mother Angelica, one of my heroes, that says, I'm not afraid of failing. I'm afraid of, at the end of my life, God saying, look what you could have done if you just had faith, if you just listened in prayer, if you just took a chance. But I don't want to scare people who are wanting to get into YouTube. I don't want them to say, well, I can't do high quality, so I'm not going to do it. Do your best. Offer the Lord your 5 loaves and 2 fish, and slowly, like I said, slowly get better.
So you mentioned before, your 2 trad for the charismatics and your 2 charismatics for the trad.
Right.
But on your channel, you're not making videos about liturgy wars and stuff like that. How have you managed to stay out of all of that? Is that intentional, or
no?
Have you just haven't thought of it?
So this is the thing, Keith. This is the thing. I strive to be as cunning as a serpent and as gentle as a dove. When I was teaching religion in 2006 through 2009, I'd opened the textbook. In the religion textbooks, every single one of the photos without miss was some old lady giving communion to a kid in a wheelchair or children giving communion. No sacred art, no communion on the tongue, no altar rails, no ad orientem. And so the messaging that the modernists did after the Second Vatican Council to try and change the faith, because there's an axiom, it's a very important axiom that we all need to learn. It's Latin, but I'll translate it. Lex orandi, lex credendi, lex vivendi. How I pray impacts what I believe, impacts how I live. So in order to change the world infiltrated many of our religious institutions. By changing our prayer, then the faith decreases in the church. So I am very, very, very strong in my beliefs concerning the way I pray, how that impacts my belief. And I've got a saying, theology first. So when I say theology first, I mean, I kneel for communion because I believe that there's a body and a soul united, and what I do with my body impacts my disposition. I don't believe in communion because of arbitrary traditions.
Yeah.
I believe that there's a theology that informs me. I prefer and I encourage Mass said ad orientem, where the priest faces the crucifix, faces the tabernacle, and it's not that he has his back to the people, but that he is leading us to Christ, and that when the priest is facing the people and holding up the Eucharist, I am too fixated on a human face. It's impossible when a face is looking at you and staring right at you to not look at it. And so the theology that the priest faces east, that Christ is going to come back from the east. We are all journeying to him from the west. The priest acts in the person of Christ. And so by me not seeing his face, it is easier for me to imagine that it is Christ himself offering the sacrifice. So theology first. And I'm very, very convicted of kneeling for communion, receiving communion on the tongue, and ad orientem during the Mass. And so all of my videos, you will only see communion kneeling and on the tongue. You will 99% of the time, the priest will be facing the east. Is it licit? Is it valid for a priest to face the people? Yes. But there's a saying that the greatest catechesis is a liturgy well performed, a liturgy well done, because it echoes, catechesis is an echo. It shows with the language of the body, this is really Jesus Christ. I don't kneel on my knees and stick my tongue out for a cracker.
Yeah, that's right.
So I'm very strong on that. But again, I am not into tradition for the sake of tradition. I used to only go to the Latin Mass on Sundays. That was my preferred form of Mass. I recognize it's not everybody's preferred form. I would not miss Mass because it was the Novus Ordo. To this day, I go to daily Mass, sometimes Mass twice a day, depending on what's happening. Novus Ordo Masses. And I believe that they're sanctifying. So the liturgy is very, very important because it is the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. It is the real presence of Christ. That is where Christ encounters me. And so it's not tradition for the sake of tradition. Like, I'm not one who believes that the Novus Ordo must be done in Latin. I believe the language of the people is important. And this is, again, my personal opinion. Like, when I have high school students who have never been to Mass before, and they go to a Mass and it's Novus Ordo, but it's all in Latin, and they have no idea what the priest is saying, especially in the parts of the Mass that change from Mass to Mass, like the opening prayers and the collect, etc. Like, the priest doesn't know what he's saying. The people don't know what he's saying. Like, who's that benefiting? I don't know. But at the same time, I recognize, I go to the TLM, I go to the low Mass, I can't even hear what the priest is saying, and my heart is elevated to God. So the liturgy wars are a war, but war is not pretty, and you have to be as cunning as a serpent and as gentle as a dove. And I don't think anybody should get canceled over it. Be prudent. For example, my friend who's a pastor, he wanted to start doing Mass facing the east, and so he didn't change a Mass to be one day the 10 a.m. is from facing the people to facing the east. He added a Mass and said, this Mass is going to be facing the east. And he had that Mass there for many years before another Mass became more like that. He didn't just put altar boys everywhere. He said the 5 o'clock will be where the altar boys serve. So you have to do things gradually, with prudence, with explanation, with theology behind it, and pick your battles.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. That tension is real, though.
Oh, it's for real.
What's something that people don't know about you that you wish they knew about you?
It's something that I'm just discovering about myself, actually, and that I am very broken. I hope you enjoyed that interview. Do me a favor, go over to Keith's YouTube channel, give him a like, give him a subscribe, watch that interview, and let him know what you think.
God bless you. God love you. And we'll see you very soon.
If someone said, what does it mean to be the best father you can possibly be? What does that mean to you? If you could go back to that little boy who doesn't have the father, who's trying to figure all this out, 12 years old,
Yes.
what would you tell that boy
Yeah.
if you could travel back in time? What are your biggest challenges that you're dealing with right now? What are some of your goals forward? Where do you see that going in the next 5 years?